Hey, what's going on, guys? Heart Pirates TCG here, just kind of bringing you this video that I want to talk about, and this would help, even experienced players, but definitely a lot of, newer players too. There's a lot of new players into this game, and even some people that have been playing this game for a little bit, might not know these things. So without further ado, I just want to go over 7 tips that I think would help you win more games. So this next strategy right here, we're going to talk about the Whitebeard strategy, right? And it's basically the idea of it is swinging when you're attacking with 6,000 twice instead of a 7,000 and a 5,000. For example, if you have your leader and a pacifista and you have 1 Dawn left, right, and you're going against a 5,000 attack leader, it is better to attack with 2 6,000 characters in the early to mid game than it is attacking a 5,000 leader with a 7,000 and a 5,000. The reason this is because most of the time when you attack with 7,000, they are going to take that life regardless. And then when you attack with a 5,000, they will counter out of the attack with a card that is not very useful to them in that matchup, more than likely. For example, if you attack for a 7,000, they're going to take that life and they'll have an extra card in their hand. And then when you attack with 5,000, they'll block or counter with a with like a pacifista or something along those lines, with a Kuma, with a Thatch, with a Marco they might not need, right? But if you attack with 2 6,000 attack characters, then they have to discard 2 2Ks to get out of both attacks. Most of the time they're just going to take the first life anyway. And then the second time that you attack, they're going to have to discard a 2K. When you make them discard multiple 2Ks in hand, especially early in the game, it makes it a lot easier to attack for lethal later on in the game, and also it makes it a lot easier to get rid of characters on the board towards the late game. Sorry if you hear that, that little breath behind me. That's my dog begging for attention. But yeah, guys, for most decks play anywhere from 8 to 12 2Ks, and when the early and mid game you're forcing them to discard 3, 4, 5 2Ks to get out of attacks, when you're going for lethal and when you're clearing their board, it's a lot easier to figure out, okay, they probably don't have 4 2Ks in hand because we already got rid of 5 of them, right? What are the odds they drew pretty much all of their 2Ks that they play without a lot of searchability? Not a lot. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is not leaving Dawn up early in the game for defensive events, because the reason being is early on in the game, you're spending most of your Dawn to play characters, and you're not really attacking for these big numbers. For example, if you have a character, let's say if you have like a Zeph or something, or I'm going to have background footage and it might not be Zeph, but it might be a different character that is, 4,000 or 5,000 power, right? If you have that character rested, odds are the player on their turn is going to play a character, for 3 or 4 or 5 Dawn and only attack with, maybe 0 Dawn or 1 Dawn. So, you leaving 2 Dawn up for a Love Mellow is not really going to be very helpful for you, and your Dawn is much better suited for attacking the previous turn with that character, or with your characters, or playing another character. The only exception for this is if you're playing a deck like Blue Doflamingo and you plan around using a Love Mellow because you don't want to mess up your stack with Perona or Doflamingo or something like that, right? Another exception is if you are leaving Dawn up for like Dragon Twister, something that deals with the opponent's board, and it's good in that matchup. For example, if you have Dragon Twister against Law or Zoro, then it's perfectly acceptable to leave 2 Dawn up early in the game to kind of combat their board, because you're using that Dawn almost like in an aggressive way, because you're getting rid of a character while also defending. So those are 2 exceptions right there. But if you shouldn't really ever leave like 2 Dawn up for like a Red Hawk, or even a Punk Gibson, unless the situation calls for it, right? Unless they have like a Sugar and they like play into it for some reason, and at that point they're just bad and you don't really need to, you don't really need to save Dawn up. There's a couple exceptions, but when both players are playing at the highest level, you don't really need to save that Dawn up, unless it's pretty much your Dragon Twister. The next tip that I want to talk about is counting Whitebeard's hand, and then honestly, use your fingers to kind of to deduce how many cards you can get out of their hand to decide whether you're going for lethal or not. For example, let's say Whitebeard has 10 cards in hand and he has 1 Dawn Up, right? That means it could either be a Radical Beam or a Guard Point. For me, I'm a pessimist, so I always try to assume the worst case scenario, especially if you didn't see them search it. So if they didn't search the Rad Beam or anything like that, or the Guard Point, just assume they have the Rad Beam, right? So assume they can go up to 10,000. Right? So what I do is, if I'm deciding whether to go for lethal or not against a Whitebeard, you know, at first, obviously, you make sure they have no blockers. Okay, they have no blockers. They have 10 cards in hand and 1 Dawn Up. You have to see, you know, let's say you attack their leader for 14,000, right? You kind of deduce with 1 Dawn Up, how many cards does this get out of their hand, right? So for 14,000, you are getting rid of, let's say, a Rad Beam, and then 2 2Ks and a 1K. So you're getting 4 cards out of hand at most, right? And that would leave them with 6 cards left, right? And then you have to look at the rest of your, you know, how much Dawn you have left, what other characters you have left, if they're, you know, strong enough to really get cards out of Whitebeard's hand in an efficient way. And if you are relying, unless you are going to lose, if you're relying on a 14K swing to kill a Whitebeard with 10 cards in hand, you are going to lose 99.9% of the time. All right? Now, what you could do is use this as a way to, okay, you take 4 cards out of their hand and then you wall up and play defensively, right? And then you try it again the next turn when they have only 7 cards in hand, or, you know, 5 cards in hand, depending on if they play anything, right? That's how you decide. That's how you decide when to go into a Whitebeard if you have the chance, right? If you're betting on one big swing when they have way too many cards in hand to win you the game, then you're going to lose every time. But if you can get a ton of cards out of their hand and then play defensively, or when you know that your attacks are big enough to make them pretty much math them out of the game, that's when you should go in. You know, the only time you should go in is if you are going to lose the next turn regardless, and you're just, you know, kind of hoping for a Hail Mary right there. All right, the next tip that we're going to go over is, if you're in a bad matchup, you should usually mulligan for cards that give you the best route to victory, even if your current hand is playable. In this, for me, honestly, I tell everyone that I play to win, and I don't play to not lose. For example, if you're playing against Katakuri with Rebecca, right? It's kind of a hard matchup. I mean, I believe it's a very tough matchup, but there obviously are ways you can win, and that's if you draw your Olympus, your Truno Bastardos, your Luffy's and Konguns. So when you mulligan, or when you're deciding whether to keep these hands or not, and you don't see 1 or 2 of your most important cards, you should aggressively mulligan, because you need to figure out a way to win that game, right? You're like, if you are, you know, keeping a hand just because you have a Rebecca, it's like, oh, it's playable, but, you know, if I don't see my cards on you know, when I need to in a timely fashion, then I'm going to lose. So what I like to do is, if I'm playing against, like, you know, Crocodile or Katakuri or Queen or something like that, when I'm playing like a deck like Rebecca, I look for my removal, and I look for like my cost minus cards, right? And that's how you win those games. If you're playing, let's say, Katakuri, right? And we'll not say Katakuri because it's more of like a luck deck, but if you're playing against a deck like Zoro, and you're playing, for example, Crocodile, right? You're looking for Sentomaru, you're looking for Dragon Twister, you're looking for not necessarily your 10-drop Kaidos, because it's just, you know, you're not really going to get much value there. You're not really even looking for Mihawk. You're just looking for cards that can deal with their early game aggression, and that's why you have to mulligan to basically to win the game, and don't just like keep hands because you might draw into the cards you might need. If you have a chance, you should take it. The next tip that we are going to talk about is starving your opponent of resources in a mirror match for grind decks. That's pretty much how you win most mirror matches, right? So a long time ago, I played Kid back in set 1, and how you won the mirror match was basically not attacking or basically keeping even life with your opponent, or just not attacking them at all, and then just trying to break down their hand, and then eventually crack their board, right? That's how you won. However, I recently played when I won my store championship, I played a purple green Dofi mirror match, and that mirror match, I was forced to go first, and the 3 turns I had options to attack my opponent's leader, I chose to pass. And he looked at me a little weird, and I didn't say anything, but he didn't ask anything either. I think he just kind of realized, but he attacked my leader. All right. And then he gave me a card. I gladly took it. He attacked my leader again. I gladly took it. And then he started turning his character sideways. And when he gave me cards, I was denying him cards. So basically, it was like if he would swing with his, for example, his Usopp, right? His film Usopp. I would get a card. And then on my turn, I would attack his Usopp. And I would either get a card from his hand or get rid of the card on the field. And eventually, at one point in the game, I had 7 cards in hand. He had 1. And then when I started attacking his life, you know, towards the end of the game, he almost came back and beat me because I gave him so many cards to counteract what I was, you know, what I was denying him of, you know. And he found, you know, a 10-drop Dofi. He found his Punk Gibson. He found Sugar. He found Film Luffy. He was finding a lot of cards because I started attacking his life. And I can only imagine me losing that game, especially because he won the dice roll, if I would have attacked his characters early, right? So if you're playing a grindy deck, you know, kind of like Law or Kid or, you know, Film Dofi, Rebecca, Queen, you don't want to give your opponent resources because they might just find cards to beat you. Next tip that we're going to go over, I think we have 2 left, right? Is sequencing your attacks correctly. Guys, this comes down to a lot to game knowledge. For example, if you're playing against blue, odds are most of the time that they are playing 3000 Worlds and they are playing Red Rock. But even more specifically, if you have a 4-cost character and a 3-cost character, it is probably best to attack with the 3-cost character first because they have multiple triggers to bottom deck that character, rather than if you have a 4-cost character, there's only realistically 1. It's Red Rock, right? Now obviously they, you know, some people play cards like Sobbles. I know VV Theory, my buddy James, who, you know, is on YouTube as VV Theory, he plays Sobbles, which, you know, most decks don't really play. But realistically, it's better to, you know, get rid of the cards that are more easily dealt with when you're attacking first. That way when they do trigger, let's say a 3000 Worlds on your Zoro attack, or let's say you have an Usopp and a Film Zoro, just to be you know, it's general here, right? You should attack with the Usopp first because, you know, if they trigger into a 3000 Worlds or a Red Rock, they are going to be able to bottom deck that, rather than just a Red Rock would be able to bottom deck the Zoro, if that makes sense. But even more specifically than that, guys, whenever you are attacking with a character, generally you know which one is more important than the other, right? So, for example, let's say you have a 4/6 vanilla and a 4/5 vanilla, right? You should actually attack with the 4/6 vanilla first, because if they trigger into something that gets rid of it, your character already did its job. They're not going to get rid of the 4/5. So your 4/5 vanilla is actually going to be able to attack, and they're going to basically use that trigger to deal with a card that already attacked, rather than taking away your last attack. For example, if you swing with the 4/5 vanilla first and they trigger into something, they'll get rid of the 4/6 vanilla, rather than if you attack with the 4/6 vanilla first, when they trigger into something, they will get rid of the 4/6 vanilla, and then your 4/5 still has that attack. It's very small things like that that could actually help you later on in the game. And that might sound very confusing. I'm very sorry about that. The last tip that we are going to talk about is, if you can, you should be very aggressive to decks with massive boss monsters. For example, that's usually how you beat Katakuri, right? Is you get them down to 1 life, and then you get them to, you know, fear, okay, if I drop Big Mom, do I just lose, right? We did the same thing to Kaido back in set 1, is we got Kaido down to 1 life, and we were like, okay, drop your 10-drop Kaido. If you do, you die next turn. And that is kind of how you play, if you can, against some of these decks that just have, you know, massive, you know, tempo swinging cards, is we get them to be too scared to play it, right? And when they are too scared to play their cards, then they just start losing, right? They are basically going away from the strategy that helps them win, and they are playing not to lose. However, that's a lose-lose scenario anyway. So you put them in a position where if they play their card, then they're most likely going to lose, and if they don't play their card, they're most likely going to lose. So that is my strategy towards going against these decks. For example, you can say the same thing about blue, right? You know, it's like you can get them down to 1 life or 0 life, and then you are no longer scared of 10-drop Kaido, because you will put 10 down on your leader and attack for game, right? Same with Mihawk. put 10 Dawn on your leader, attack for game. There's so many different decks that you could take advantage of this. The only deck that actually you can't take advantage of this is against, like, you know, a green, because if they play Dofi, then they just pretty much skip your entire turn. But that is the strategy. And how you do this as well, guys, is especially if they have no blockers, on turns where you have the option of playing a character. Let's say you have 7 Dawn up and you have let's say they have 2 life, right? And you have 8 Dawn up, right? And they have no blockers, but they have a couple characters on the board. What you do is you know, put 4 whatever on one of your characters and attack for a massive number, and they pretty much have to take it. And then you put like 4 on your leader and attack for 9, and they either have to discard 3 cards or they're gonna have to take that life as well. Right? And then when they take that life as well, they can no longer play their big characters, and they're always playing with less Dawn because they have to save up Dawn for blockers or events or kill you basically the next turn, right? And the second that they run out of blockers or events, then they automatically lose. I was actually put in a position like that when I was playing Rebecca, and it was not fun. And luckily I was able to kind of find all the blockers by just continuously bottom decking them and searching them with the leader. But you know, pretty much no deck has answers for that, except for sometimes Rebecca. But guys, that is those are the tips that I wanted to talk to you about. If you found value from this video, definitely let me know in the comments if this was actually helpful. I can try to find some more tips that maybe you guys might not know, or maybe just forgot about. Like the video if you like the video, and, you know, subscribe to the channel if you want to see some more content. I post very frequently. So with that being said, I'll see you guys on my next video. Peace.